Hello there and welcome to my guide for painting Octo 1 from Puppets of War. I haven't glued it together yet, I'm keeping both parts separately, but the first thing I'm going to do is spray it with some matte white spray from Colourforge. Then for all the areas on Octo 1, that will be white, will be painted with some grey cere. And then highlighted with some matte white. Now we're not going to be too careful with this because we are eventually going to start chipping all this paintwork and make it look rusty and dirty and filthy. With the white out of the way, I'm now going to use some Mephiston red to start painting any of the red areas. And then I'll give these areas a wash with some Carroburg crimson. Once that red is dry, I'm going to relayer the Mephiston red just to brighten things up a little bit. Then a 50-50 mix of Mephiston red and Evil Sunz scarlet. And then Evil Sunz scarlet just by itself. And then lastly a 50-50 mix of Evil Sunz scarlet and Wild Rider red. Next I'm going to use some Abaddon black to paint in all the gaps in the windows. And then I'll use Iron Hand Steel to start painting any areas that I want to be silver. And then I'm going to give all the silver areas and those windows a wash with some Nuln Oil. Once that wash had dried, I made a 50-50 mix of Iron Hand Steel and Stormhost Silver to start highlighting all of the metal areas. Because I want to make the vehicle look a little bit more grubbier and to reduce the shine as much on the metal, I then gave it another wash, but this time with some Agrax Earthshade. While that dries, I'm then going to paint the petrol canisters, or the gas canisters if you're American, on the top with some Corn Red. And for those, I'll give them a wash with some Carroburg Crimson. For the front of the burners, I use some Screaming Bell. And these were washed with some Agrax Earthshade. I want to add a little bit of colour variation, so I'm going to paint the little box that's sitting on the top with some Warpstone Glow, which I will give a wash with some Beltan Green. While that wash dries, I'm then going to move back to the fuel tanks, and I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Wazdacker Red and Corn Red. And this will be followed by an edge highlight of Wazdacker Red just by itself. To highlight the flamers, which are about to go blurry, I used a 50-50 mix of Screaming Bell and Stormhost Silver. For the green case on top, I used a 50-50 mix of Warpstone Glow and Mute Green. I then used some Deathworld Forest for the straps and bandages, as that will keep in theme with the Ghostbusting Orcs. And these were washed with some Athonian Camo Shade. For license plates, I used a couple of coats of Flashbusters Yellow, and I also used it to pick out a couple of the tubes and pipes. These areas were then washed with some Cassandora Yellow, and while that wash dried, I went ahead and used some Macragge Blue for the rest of the piping. And then all of that blue was washed with some Drakenhof Nightshade. To highlight the straps, I then used a 50-50 mix of Deathworld Forest and Ogryn Camo. And to highlight the yellow, I used a 50-50 mix of Flashbusters Yellow and Matte White. For the blue pipes, it was a 50-50 mix of Macragge Blue and Calgar Blue. I then used the same mix but at a 30-70 ratio for a second highlight. I then used some Abaddon Black to pick out any of the black areas that I wanted to use. This is the front of the number plate, a little bit on the pipes, and then lastly all of the wheels. Then wash the wheels with some Nuln Oil. Once the wash is dried, I'm then going to use some Corvus Black to start highlighting the tyres. And then I'm going to use some Temple Guard Blue to start painting some of the lights. And Dawn Yellow to paint some of the other lights. Then I'll wash the blue with some Achelian Green. And the yellow will then get washed with some Cassandora Yellow. For the rear lights, I'm going to use some Mephiston Red. And I'll wash those with some Carroburg Crimson. While that wash dries, I'm going to use some Grey Sear to start painting the logo. And I'll also use that to paint any of the gauges that are dotted around the top. These will then be highlighted with a 50-50 mix of Grey Sear and matte white. Followed by a final highlight of matte white just by itself. Once the wash is dried on the lights, I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Temple Guard Blue and matte white for the blue. Followed by the same mix but at a 30-70 ratio in favour of matte white. And then I'll use a tiny little bit of matte white for the centre. For the yellow, I'll relayer the Dawn Yellow. This will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Dawn Yellow and matte white. And then a tiny little bit of matte white in the centre. For the red, we're going to use some Evil Sunz Scarlet. Followed by a 50-50 mix of Evil Sunz Scarlet and matte white. And then finally, matte white just in the centre. Now if you want, you can leave it like this and just glue it together, then glue it to base if you choose to glue it to a base, and you could be sorted, but I'm going to messy it up because it is an orc vehicle and they are never properly clean. And to do that, I'm going to use some Rhinox hide. I'm going to paint that into the sort of crevices where the scratches are, and I'm also going to chip away at the white and just leave loads of little marks everywhere. Once that's done, I'm then going to use some Iron Hand Steel just on some choice areas just to pick it out so it looks like it's gone all the way through down to the metal. And then finally, and really annoyingly just out of shot, I'm going to use some powder. And now this is some sort of orange powder that's basically like a rust colour. And I'm going to use that to dab all the lower area of the vehicle to make it look like it's all been rusted. And with that, Orcto 1 is done. You can dirty him up more if you want to, however I thought I'd leave it here because I want to keep as much of the Ghostbusters theme shining through as possible. An absolutely fantastic model from Puppets of War. Really can't emphasize just how much this brings me joy. All in all, it only took between 6 and 7 hours to paint, and most of that is doing a lot of the silver work and the chipping at the end. That said, you can completely ignore the chipping at the end, sort of, shave off quite a substantially large amount of time. But as I said, absolutely gorgeous to paint. Really love him. Superb. If you want to see more sort of tutorials for Warhammer 40,000 stuff, I've got some floating around on my channel. And give us a subscribe, the video a thumbs up, maybe a share. And, well, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye for now.